committee of the whole meeting to order. Yeah, that's first. Roll call, please, Madam Clerk. Here.
Trustee Lambert.
Here.
Trustee Martin. Here. Trustee Pierce. Here. Trustee McManus. Here. And Trustee Stillman and Trustee Marshall.
Need a motion to approve the minutes from the committee of the whole October 28th. They were corrected. There was a voting error in there, and the clerk has already fixed it. It had to do with the approval of the previous minutes, and it said 7:36. So that's the correct.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of October 28th, 2025.
Second.
And Brandon, correct?
Yeah.
Thank you. Any comments or questions about the minutes? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So approved. Public comment this time, we will give the audience a 2-minute opportunity for citizens to voice opinions on the committee of the whole. The committee of the whole cannot respond if they cannot look for meeting requirements. Seeing none, we'll move on to the committee updates. Planning Commission, Nancy Pierce.
I am not aware of.
Pardon me? We'll get that at the board meeting.
Oh, we're doing the committee of the whole. Yeah. Oh. Another one.
Thank you. Nancy?
I'm unaware of anything, Pete.
Okay. Parks and Rec, Holly?
We just did an update on our project here in Crawford Park. And we are looking forward to next year, kind of looking at other parts, with the open space plan, and we also talked about another use for Lily Park.
We know Mr. Wishaw is sick tonight, so he cannot tell us about the Illinois Utility District. Visit Racine County, Brian Martin, do you have something to add?
No, we had a meeting that was canceled, and now there's an upcoming meeting.
Okay. I have nothing on public committees. New business discussion on committee updates. Section of committee of the whole agenda, intent and content. Who wanted to take this up?
That was me that asked for it.
Okay.
My question wasn't, Pete and I kind of had a discussion around it kind of thing, was when we first formed the committee as a whole, this is my memory, so it can be corrected, was that part of the purpose of our committee of the whole was to be able to have fairly open discussions about a particular topic, about what was going on. And later, we did come up with the specifics on these committees, but it's kind of like, if there's something going on in planning that's coming down the road, Pete has indicated that it's his understanding that we can only talk about what has occurred, we can't talk about what's coming. So it's really just a clarification discussion amongst all of us, like, what really are we trying to accomplish when we talk about these committees?
Sure, I understand.
Well, I do my thing. Elaine, is there any prohibition about, for some reason, about somebody on the committee talking about what's upcoming or what's anticipated? If they're just telling what it is, not the explanation.
So the
Hold on.
is this that?
No.
There you go.
Lights on.
You're good.
Okay.
Christine?
Yep, good.
So the open meetings laws of the state require that if we're going to talk about an item, it should be on an agenda. So if you're going to have a generic committee reports topic and not specify what you're talking about, it allows a little leeway to just give a brief update about what happened at a particular committee, but it's not subject to debate, or really you're not supposed to talk about it in depth. It's supposed to be a one-way communication, almost like a letter, right?
Okay.
Or a committee report. So if you want to talk about upcoming items that are coming forward to that committee, the agenda should list them by topic so that you actually can talk about them.
Okay.
But my understanding of these committee updates was meant to be the Plan Commission talked about, or the plan commission had this, this, and this on their agenda, so FYI, that's gonna be coming to, you know, a future village board meeting, or Parks and Rec, we talked about X, Y, and Z, just as an FYI, so that if you're interested, you can go and find those committee meetings, or follow up with the chair later if you have a specific question, or with staff. If you want to talk about a specific item, you really should have a sub 1, 2, and 3 under that particular item if you want to have a conversation. The concern about doing that, though, would be you don't want this committee to usurp what that body is doing either. So you don't need it to appear here in a substantive way or and appear there in a substantive way later on, because maybe the committee or commission hasn't yet done its work on that topic. So you need to be careful about how you handle it.
Yeah, thank you.
I get that there's always a tension between open meetings law and transparency, it seems to me. So are you saying, because it's helpful to know what's coming up without looking at the agendas of all the subcommittees? So, but you're saying you could do that, but you would need to say, to specify what those upcoming things are as you understand it. That's how you would do it. I just find it helpful.
I think brevity is the key with the committee reports. I don't think it's wrong to say, hey, everybody pay attention because our parks advisory body is going to be talking about Crawford Park, and that's an important topic. What the difference between that and getting into something substantively is the problem. So it's a fine line, and to be honest, it's a gray area, and you don't cross it until you cross it, and then you draw a complaint, and that's when you have a problem. So it's a fine line. And I think that the committee agendas, you know, get emailed out, right, to all the board members so that you can see that in your email when that comes across. But,
They do, but the public doesn't necessarily. I mean, I guess they would have to go look at it.
right, right. So is your point that you're trying to use that, the committee updates, as a method of communicating to those that might be in attendance here?
Right, because for example, nobody would, I'm on the Visit Racine County, that's not a committee that typically any of the other board members would go to, because they could. I think they're open to the public, but I'm not sure. So there isn't any way for me to communicate what happens there or what's upcoming without giving at least a general explanation.
I think the committee of the whole could set parameters about the kind of information you want to share as a part of the update, and that certainly could be done at this particular topic. So if you have a directive that you want to expand the information that's included under the committee updates, under, for example, 5A Plan Commission, if you want to include a little blurb there, you could so direct that. You also have the method to be able to send meeting minutes to the clerk to forward on to all the board members on a monthly basis. You could do that to provide those updates.
The problem is, it doesn't get to the public. Part of my concern is that people sitting here and stuff, the foggy idea of what's going on.
That's true. I mean, you could ask that there be some information posted on your village website with a link to the Visit Racine County website. That, of course, doesn't provide an announcement here either. I don't know how much.
I just want people nodding out there when I say it's helpful for people to know what's going on sitting here.
I would add that staff is always available, so if there are specific questions somebody's interested in or is interested in any information or topics that are upcoming, they could always reach out to staff as well.
They would know the answer.
What's that?
We would know the answer. And none of the
We wouldn't know the answer to the question that's being raised that the general public is interested in.
What I'm saying is that the public is sitting here and they get bits of information by sitting here and listening to what we're doing, including talking about I mean, I didn't have any information today, but I sometimes do to say, Racine County is doing this, or we did that. And that's helpful, I think, to people sitting here, to the public. That's why I think it's important. It isn't just that board members, can communicate with one another, because it's true, we can email, I can send out minutes, but I would rather err on the side of the public knowing of transparency, I guess. That's my point. And I get the tension between transparency and the open records law.
And part of the issue with what the plan commission is, we have certain deadlines for applications to be submitted. We have to review those. Are they right to be brought to the plan commission? I mean, and that's where, somebody could reach out to the planning director and say, do we have any submissions? Is there anything upcoming? You can certainly reach out. We have phones, our emails are active. I think staff would be happy and well versed to be able to answer any question if somebody's interested in what's coming up, or answering any of those questions as well.
Which I greatly appreciate, and I realize I brought this up basically coming out of planning, but I think what I was also looking at in part-time was discussion amongst ourselves. So let's say if I said, there's a new concept coming before planning to have bell ringing on Thursday. Just as a matter of if it's information discussion at this level, it then goes back in. It's an awareness, not a decision making. That was what I think I was asking about from a panel perspective. Not, and I understand what you're saying, and I respect that. That if I wanted to talk about bell ringing, it should have said planning commission item 1A, bell ring, kind of thing. And then it still needs to be held within. So it's really taking information from staff and saying, hey, everybody up here, be aware this is happening. We can have a general discussion, but we can't usurp the power of the underlying.
And I get that. And so I would say part of the purpose of the committee of the whole is the first step, right? I mean, outside of things from the recommending bodies like the plan commission, but like the committee of the whole is really the first time it's kind of brought. Yes, and then there's discussion, and then there's a 2-week gap from committee of the whole to village board. And there are times where things have been brought to committee of the whole, and it was, from the direction of the committee of the whole, it's not ready. Go back, refine this, work on these items. And so, I mean, I think like Elaine was saying, there's really a fine balance in how we get that information. And I mean, I'm happy to work with anybody on the committee of the whole and try to figure out what is that happy medium, figure out what goes on the agenda, how do we get that information to the general public outside of maybe just the agendas or what that looks like. We'll create a piece on here for general talking purposes on agenda items. It's just hard to plan for future agenda items when they may not be necessarily right to be kind of discussed.
No, I think we're better off than we were. I still have some other questions, but I think thanks Elaine for that, because I think that makes a good point. It's a stop, but how do we discuss amongst ourselves as far as we're the board, not necessarily in a one-on-one, which we also need to do when it's appropriate with proper staff. That's it.
Okay, 6B policy and public comment section of meeting agendas.
Well, I think that was me again. When it came up in planning that we did not have a public comment, and I was just trying to understand the basis.
Well, I'm interested in that too, because the irony is that it was the only time in my memory in the past number of years that we haven't had public comment at the planning commission level, even though the topic was getting all of the information to the public on the survey. So it's not clear to me who makes that decision or who has the right to make that decision.
Well, it's actually defined by ordinance in section 2311, which is meeting agendas for the village board. It's under number 5 for citizen comments. And then there's also section 2315, which identifies Standing committees of the village board, which includes the committee of the whole. And that is also states that each standing committee shall place an item on its agenda for citizens' comments and shall report to the village board such concerns as expressed by citizens. So both the committee of the whole and the village board are required to have public comment. When it comes to plan commission, I would say, there are a number of things that we look at related to projects. When it comes to use of a parcel or property, that use usually requires some level of a zoning change or a land use amendment. All of those require a public hearing, which incorporates public comment into them. Some of the other items that we are looking at, are site plans, where we talk about lighting, landscape standards, architectural standards. I don't know that we're interested in necessarily doing site plans by complete committee, right? That's why there's staff to look at and review. A lot of those things are vetted through the village code to make sure that they are ready to be brought to the planning commission for a recommendation to the village board. Where then there is citizen comment, and the general public will be able to make comments to the village board agree with or disagree with any project that has been recommended.
I think this specific instance, though, had to do with the omission of the public comment. In what had been a long-standing pattern in the context of the topic under discussion was the special planning committee and the long-range planning for the village, and that's done at the level of the planning commission. It does not come back to the board, so there was no opportunity for people to speak about it until after the fact. So that's, I think, was the part that I found distributed.
To speak about which portion?
About the long-range planning,
The subcommittee.
the subcommittee.
Well,
That was the topic.
but be able to express
Concern about the survey? Sure, people, I mean, I can tell you that people express concern to me about the wording of a number of the survey questions, and I think people were prepared to make public comments about that, and there was no other venue for them to make those comments because it didn't come before the board. That's limited to the planning commission. It doesn't come back to the board.
Well, and the survey was drafted in part by SewerPac, in part by staff, and then vetted by the subcommittee, which was their role as part of that process.
Well, they never saw it after that subcommittee never saw it after the change.
And that was the recommended approval by that subcommittee that staff would take into account the changes that they made based on comment from that subcommittee, and it was brought forward to the planning commission.
Right, that was not the genesis. I respect all that and I appreciate it, and I understand some pieces of it, but my viewpoint of looking at it was maybe a little different. Ever since I've been involved, for 5 years, roughly now, and I've always said to people in the public comment is for you to come and talk about anything you'd like in the village, pros, cons. You don't like the color of the garbage cans at Gorney Park, whatever it is, that's their moment to speak to us. So its absence from that perspective was my concern.
And I respect that. I would say the planning commission is made up of 2 elected officials, one being the president of the village board and a liaison or a trustee, and the rest are appointed and they're general citizens. So I would look at it as that if people have displeasure with anything that is being brought forward by a recommending body, that displeasure or acceptance of an item should be directed to the village board as the actual decision.
And I guess I see it differently because this is an open forum where people should have the freedom to just tell us who they. It's going to be a recorded message. Everybody's going to see it. So I just don't feel like this is discouraging it. It's like saying we really want to hear from you. We have gotten things in the past at planning that didn't really belong in planning, but that information has been passed along to the appropriate party. So that the public was heard. That's my point.
policy decision. So if the village board was interested in it, we would have to look at the ordinance and then we would look to amend such ordinance if that was what you were interested in looking.
6C, discussion on dark skies ordinance.
That was fine. I mentioned that, I think in an earlier committee of the whole, and then I think it sort of fell off the radar. It wasn't in one of them. We used to get a summary of all of the items that had been brought up and where they were, if they were language or not. Anyway, I know that it was brought to my attention by a citizen, and Mount Pleasant, I think, has such an ordinance, and it has to do with having lights aimed downward, not upward, and I think it's an ecological thing. But it was brought to my attention by a citizen, and I know that Mount Pleasant hasn't, so I looked it up. So I thought we might look into it.
And I will direct that to the planning director as we had a conversation about the dark skies.
Trustee Martin, when you say we should look into it, what is the board directing staff to do for the dark skies?
I would say, look at the Mount Pleasant ordinance and see if we might, or I guess the board now can say, my suggestion would be that you look at the Mount Pleasant ordinance and see if we can more or less copy and paste. Because I think it's beneficial and I don't think there's any substantial detriment to it.
So if I'm understanding correctly, you are looking for staff to look at the Mount Pleasant ordinance and then draft a modified exterior ordinance for the Village of Caledonia that mimics
Correct.
Mount Pleasant.
Correct. Because they've already done
I'll take a motion, Frank.
that. Do we need a motion for that? Okay, I move that staff look at the, review the Mount Pleasant ordinance on dark skies and draft similar ordinance for review by the board and forward it to the board.
Brandon, can I recommend that you have that brought back to the committee of the whole so that you have to make do the work here, and then if you're ready to move it forward, you move it to the board for action?
Yes, as Elaine suggested, this my motion is modified.
I'll second. To review the Mount Pleasant dark sky ordinance and drop a similar ordinance for the committee of the whole.
Correct.
Do we want them, like, putting the time in the drafting ordinance, or, I don't know anything about this topic, so can we maybe bring it to, like, a topic to us before we have them draft, heavily and actually draft the ordinance? To, like, kind of present about
You want me to bring a
something, like,
ornithologist or something?
no, but I guess I don't know much about it, or why does Mount Pleasant have it, what are the benefits of it? I'm not saying I'm against it by any means, I just, before we draft an ordinance to put it in the, before we draft a full ordinance, put it, do we at least have like a little bit of a discussion on it? Yeah,
What can we do?
I'm interested in it.
Partly it has to do with bird migration. Bird migration is thrown off by light in the sky.
But what are options for ordinances instead of just having an ordinance? Does that
Options,
make sense?
Building code.
well, that may be part of the ordinance. I don't know what Mount Pleasant's ordinance says, actually. What I know is that one citizen came to me and said, you know what? I really care about ornithology and bird migration and also it affects insects and fireflies and so on. And Mount Pleasant has such an ordinance. That's the genesis of my bringing it here. And I thought it was a good idea. So
And I'm in agreement, I just would like a,
that's what I'm doing.
before we have an ordinance on it, I would just like to know more about it, that's all.
I would suggest that, instead of moving forward and directing Pete to draft the ordinance, that instead schedule for review by this committee, the ordinance from Mount Pleasant, so that you can review it, discuss it, get additional information as you might need, and then give staff direction on what you might want to have in place.
So it would make good sense and maybe ask And maybe ask Pete to comment on differences that he might see that exist between Mount Pleasant and ours, if it brings information to us.
And I would support that, so.
And that's fine, I'll ask the person to my attention. She would come and discuss whatever it is.
So you'd like to withdraw your motion?
Or amend it.
Well, I'll amend it, but I'm confused now about exactly where it is. Well, so what your suggestion is to,
Why don't you ask to withdraw your motion,
Right.
and if, trustee Pierce agrees, we can just start over.
right.
I agree.
So your suggestion is that we direct staff to bring the Mount Pleasant ordinance to the committee of the whole for review?
To withdraw the motion that's on the floor.
We did.
We did. We did. But we didn't vote on it.
So, yes, that would be the motion.
Okay. Got it.
Now, second.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the motion?
Yes.
Wayne goes.
The motion is to request staff to provide the committee of the whole a copy of the Mount Pleasant ordinance for review by this committee.
Motion and second?
On.
I don't know how specific the motion has to be, but I would think incorporating that, just bringing the Mount Pleasant ordinance to the committee for review and discussion, but also bring some information that can either distill the dark skies, principles and policies, what they encourage, and then compare it to the Caledonia ordinance, so that way you get more pieces than just, here's what Mount Pleasant does, this is what we do. Feel free to discuss. I think you get some context, then you would be able to understand what Dark Sky Association is trying to do, and then you can see what Mount Pleasant did, and then you can see what Caledonia is currently doing, and then we can go forward there with the discussion. If you want to go with an ordinance, updating our exterior lighting rules and regulations.
I'll second.
Okay. That's fine. I'll amend it as suggested by Wagner.
Direct staff to present the Mount Pleasant ordinance and provide analysis.
Yeah, I was trying to spare staff a little bit more work. But
And second by.
All in favor, say aye. Opposed? Okay, suggested items we place on future meeting agenda. No action.
Well, I have one, because in the most recent, League of Municipalities magazine, they have an article on agendas, a long article and then a summary. And the gist of it is, basically says, concludes that, the authority for the established meeting agendas for the governing body rests with the governing body as a whole. And my concern is that we get agendas generated by staff, I think, primarily, without input. So it seems to me that if we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, we at least should be reviewing a proposed agenda. If you read that article, I think you'll see, and we can discuss it next time, but it's
So what
an
is the
interesting
topic?
article. Pardon?
What is the topic?
I'm proposing that we discuss a review by the committee of the whole of the staff-generated proposed agenda for the next.
On agenda.
Yes.
On how agendas are created.
Yeah, correct.
There's already an ordinance that handles that.
Yes, by ordinance.
Yes.
We can place a copy of the ordinance if you want to discuss whether or not you're happy with your current ordinance, or if you want to direct changes to that ordinance. So that would be ordinance, section 2-3-11, of your code, would be, I think, what you would want to place on the agenda. Review of section 2-3-11, meeting agendas for Village Board on the next agenda.
All right. Then I move that we,
Not a motion. Just suggested item for future.
all right, then for,
Okay, moving on
can I suggest
into.
you read that article?
Continuing business, comprehensive plan stakeholder exercise, committee of the whole individual participated. Will allow exercise structure, discussion of those strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, why. Serving as a key step in assessing current conditions and identifying community priorities. Wagner, were you gonna read this or? Okay. This is the, proposal. Who are?
We need a notebook.
No, I think we might want to, for a time perspective, do we have the QR code to work on? Right, just go ahead. Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
So there's two exercises. One is our word cloud. There's a QR code over on the desk in front of you there. And basically it's just a graphic way of using words to describe the village of Caledonia. So each person has the opportunity to put 3 words in that they would, when they think of Caledonia, what it is that they would say. And then hopefully, even though we have a small group here, we could maybe see similarities. If not, we might have, 12 distinct words that describe it. And the idea was to try to come up with a way that is simple and people could react to. And so we've included it as part of exercise with the Plan Commission as well as the Special Comprehensive Plan Committee. And so we're trying to just figure out a way to express words that describe Caledonia. And we're going to see if this exercise comes into something that is expresses what I'm hoping that we can find some commonalities. If not, maybe we're going to have all unique words. And that's just a simple exercise we're going to do. Once we complete this, there's no analysis or anything like that. It's just supposed to be a visual representation of words that, in this case, the village board would use to describe the village of Caledonia. It can be strengths, weaknesses, it can be locations. There's any word that you can think of that would be a good descriptor. Well,
That's the short, it's
it's
a
a short
phrase.
answer. Yeah.
One word or short phrase.
We try to do this exercise at our public engagement efforts that we've done in the village. Interesting enough, people are a little more skittish when you walk up to them. Maybe in this QR code, I don't think that's their ideas. Once they understood who we were, not just people showing up at a farmer's market or a beer garden, people did. I joke that thought they hear what I was trying to extend their car warranty and didn't want to participate, or they thought us as someone gets it from their
You look a little shifty.
right? So, yeah, a guy at a beer garden and drinking beer.
See, this is not, in.
Oh, it's here. It's just fully.
It's just use your.
Oh, now I got it.
Got it?
Now I got it.
All right.
Okay, so you'll have.
All right,
Enter a word for a short expression.
Right.
And then after you write that in, it'll pop up another box or.
Okay. Add response.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Second.
Okay, yep.
All unique response. Because the way it's in the report, ideally, when you have enough responses, hopefully we find something that the graphic would show, like the bigger, the more common words expressed, the bigger the font gets. And then hopefully certain key descriptors would really pop out. And that was the whole
rural is spelled right, we might hit that one. Someone figures this out.
Community college.
Rural.
Real. I can't go back.
So the idea was, if we have those similar words, we start to see words get bigger in word cloud. And so you can see right here, we got all unique responses. We try our best, I always encourage you to use one word answers, hoping that maybe we have one word could start to bring out, make a bigger word. And so staff is going to be going beyond this and looking to see if there are any similar categories. So we have environmental, we have, stuff like that. We can maybe get a environmental category. And so we might not be able to use exact words, but we may have to do some work as staff to find those commonalities that make sense, and then we can bring it back to the special working committee as a potential way of understanding where the public is sitting when they look at the village of Caledonia. Our next exercise is the SWOT analysis. That's an acronym for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And this is an exercise we did with the comp plan committee, we did plan commission, and we're doing a modified version at our public events that we've held so far, which is 4. And basically, we're asking this group to identify the various attributes of the village, and it's in context with the comprehensive plan. And so, when we talk about Caledonia today, part of the word exercises are what words or images come to mind when you think of Caledonia. And we're going to be looking at in these different quadrants, we'll be looking at what do you value most about living or working in Caledonia? What makes Caledonia different than our neighbors, such as Mount Pleasant and Creek? And what do you like to see Caledonia be the next 20 years? And so, when we're looking at strengths, some of the things to think about is, what are Caledonia's strongest qualities, and that should be protected or even built, moving forward over the next 20 years. Another comment or kind of a question provoke what you want, your thoughts, or what neighborhoods or areas are great examples of what works well in the village. There can be such things as local businesses, parks, with community services. I know it's like in the workout, I saw public services work with and stuff like that. As a village board, we have to, we reference the comprehensive plan quite a bit in our recommendation from plan commission. And so, with of the comprehensive plan, what works well about our comprehensive? What elements do it? There's chapters, there's land use map, we have elements that talk about infrastructure, housing, economic development, intergovernmental cooperation. What are we doing now that is working well, or is a strength within the village? And so those are just thoughts with the strengths. And so let's start out with positive. If there's any thoughts you'd like to share with staff regarding the strengths for the village of Caledonia.
I guess I would say that we have a strong rural area with an easy access to the city of Milwaukee and Chicago.
Right. I do have Natalia entering about on the virtual post-its. So if you see, she's going to try to write down what it is you said, and then if she misinterprets, please correct us right away. So
I need to add. I think we need to add rural area easy access, because that's the unusual part of Caledonia. Lots of places have easy access.
Rural area with easy access.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think you had 2 of them actually. I can probably embed it together with easy access. The parts of the 2 areas.
I think that's.
Or was that
There's 2 strengths.
right? There's 2.
The second one would be easy access.
Well, no, that's a single strength to me. Because easy access to Milwaukee and Chicago is not unique to Caledonia. Any place within, 50 miles of Milwaukee has that. I don't see that as a particular strength. What I do see as a strength is that we have a rural area with easy access to Milwaukee and Chicago. That's the unusual.
How does it look on the screen too? On your
Yeah.
screen?
Yeah.
Is that, all
Yep.
right, there we go. Excellent.
I'll say again, our, public safety, staff and response time, very outstanding.
Public safety services.
Yep. We're really good on it. Until they give me a ticket.
I would say a very engaged citizen.
Lead people.
Good people.
One of our strengths
So-
areas is our conservation. Recognized by the state. Another strength we have here is we have several nature centers and outdoor recreation availabilities. We have the only, nature center in the county. I think I'm,
But I don't think friendly people is the same thing as involved citizenry. I think involved citizenry
Yes.
is a strength.
Yes, I agree that engaged citizens,
Yeah, it doesn't, friendly
with,
people,
with government, engaged citizens, government.
yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Sorry, look at my notes on the wall. But that's exactly why we have this up on the screen, so that way what we hear when we type in there sometimes can be a disconnect, so.
you know, we also have, I put public safety up there, but our DPW department, I mean, we talk about taking care of our roads and streets, I think that's a good strength. When you listen to other communities complain, we don't seem to get a lot of complaints. I think that's a strength that can become this.
We have a lot of civic organizations.
Loose. We do, and I think that's another way of saying it. And I think we also have good nonprofit organizations.
I.e. Moose Lodge would be.
Where the help?
Get the lines. A lot of animals. You know, what, you mentioned, rural areas, well, are there any other land use patterns that work well in the village?
I think our I-94 commercial corridor is a strength.
Right, so I wonder where you guys were saying how faster than they came down.
I'm just being quiet because it's just Nancy and me mainly taking suggestions. I'm leaving space for Tom and Holly and Mike.
Then let's, go on the flip. Right now, I'm looking at internal type attributes that we have here in the village. You know, we're looking at strengths. Now, we'll flip the script and look at weaknesses. You know, what challenges do we have in the village? You know, what can we strive to be better at? You know, looking at things as infrastructure, government services, amenities, stuff like that would be something to think about. You know, are there any conflicts within, you know, the organization looking forward in time as part of the comprehensive plan when it comes to development, economic development? You know,
I want, if we go back to strengths really quick, I think that Caledonia has a good identity as being from Cal, like if you live in Caledonia, you're proud to live in Caledonia, and, you know, we single ourselves out as being from Caledonia. The weaknesses, I think, one of the hardest things about living on this side of the village is we're landlocked, and there's only so many ways to access this side of the village, if that makes sense. We have a lot of open space over here, but on this side, there's, I mean, look at Erie's kind of dead ends into somewhere, and it's just, yeah, I think it puts a lot of stress on our local streets.
You don't cover the
which is transportation. Yeah, our transportation, they will do that.
Water.
I think retail business.
That's what I did.
I think net new construction is an issue, and it's our issue, it's everybody's issue. When you look at what we can or should do.
And we hear a lot of complaints about the high cost of water and sewer from those people who are in the water and sewer areas. So whether that's a weakness or a challenge, I'm not sure of it.
Could be a threat.
Yeah.
Where would you like it to go? Because it can be a weakness and a threat.
I know, I'm not sure where.
Yeah, I don't wanna make any assumptions.
I'm really not sure, if
It's
they can fit in any of those.
maybe you put, it's a perceived high cost, it may not be
Yeah.
actual, it's perceived.
Right, I don't know relative.
Okay. What's the challenges there? You know, when we look at threats, what challenges can impact the future, then water and sewer costs
Yes.
would be a threat. Continuing increases in water and sewer costs.
Right.
Well, and both an opportunity and a threat would be the infrastructure for water and sewer. Aging infrastructure is a threat, opportunity is a chance to improve things. Opportunities are also going to be the transportation, whether it's
Well, for example, the possibility of rail would be a huge opportunity.
And rail.
pure. Yeah, I think one of the positives back up there for us is the quality of staff.
Public transportation, I think, is an issue in not just transportation, but public transportation. I think we have very limited public
A weakness of the public transportation.
probably.
We went through this in.
And planning, yeah, we did.
And you can just say the same thing. Okay? I mean, there's only, we're missing.
One thing that was talked about in another group in doing this, and I'm not sure where it falls, but there was discussion about our restaurants and things. I think that's both a positive opportunity, specifically restaurant and food growth. What we have is good, but that's an opportunity to grow down the road.
Bruce Restaurant.
And Bruce, yeah, maybe.
Well, under the, possibilities, the good things is really is, we have a third space. It's not created by the village, but Milligers creates a third space, which is a community space. Their farmers market, they have activities year round.
What we don't have up there on the positive is the Caledonia Conservancy. It's 26 miles of trails. Separate from that, we also have trails in the community, so that becomes an opportunity to increase our outdoor recreation. Outdoor recreation opportunities. Right, but the one landing, news that we have on the water.
Well, I think too, the parks in general, I think we're finally getting on the right track of diverting money to our parks. But there's a lot to catch up with, and so I'm not sure that will fall, but,
The opportunities could be improved or expanded.
investment in parks,
Investment in parks.
physical and monetary investments in parks.
And it's maybe, never mind, I think expanded outdoor recreation opportunities to me, I think we're saying it goes beyond just parks. Or are we?
I think we're saying different things, I'm talking about village property, that we're kind of, that we have to make.
Okay.
potential for recreation underused, I believe.
Correct.
Right, and there's not very good access either to Sneem River, but it's an opportunity for.
I'm not sure on the wording on it, but it's an opportunity. We are seeing from a real, many times from a realtor's point of view, because we have our larger lots and things, as a place where people are interested in moving with larger lots, larger homes, which if it's good value, then increases pressure on services. One, you know, we forgot farming. Farming is our, it is our benefit, positive, and it's an opportunity. If there's mushroom farms, so.
I think you need to add recreation on Lake Shore to, river and Lake Shore. Add river to that. River and Lake Shore.
That's threats, you know, what, these are often external, the threats to
Well, I
what
think our
we can do in the future.
developing, the,
That's where net new construction.
how about our developing communities around us? And our desire to keep both like them, but different at the same time, if that makes sense. So if people say they want to see what's going on in Mill Creek, but that's not set. So we have a hard time, I think, sometimes figuring out what's right for the village. To stay within Caledonia and not compare ourselves to Mount Pleasant or Creek or, does that make, you see what I'm trying to say?
So,
And I think that's hard. We can't develop right now the way that Creek and Mount Pleasant do.
mhm.
Do we want to?
But I think that's also, that's what we're looking for.
With some,
Yes, I think it is. Yes.
Like we keep forgetting the ultimate urban sector. Lots of times we go so we do have a suburban.
Yeah. And that was, I think net new construction was in,
That new construction.
yeah, that's a piece.
well, state constraints on municipal.
It's net new construction.
Well, because revenue sharing is also. That's revenue sharing.
Right. But threats are everything that's external. When we're looking 20 years out, what are the, you know, the board is restricted to, you know, changing the tax rate based on that construction. That's a threat of, you know, the ability of the village board to provide additional services. And so, you know, the way those rules and regulations are, that's why you're expressing it as a threat. And Brandon, if I'm hearing you correctly, inadequate share of revenues are also a threat as our future is how we can accommodate, provide the necessary municipal services that we've come to expect.
Or that are required,
Requires or.
over constrained.
Mm-hmm.
Aren't we can, this is off the top of my head, aren't we constrained because we fund our fire departments, state funding? I often,
Random question, is there fire department funding restrictions by the state? Are you aware of?
yeah,
Fires, yes.
fire department funding is, what is it, Tom?
It's regulated by the state, it's
I mean, that's a state issue, that's a threat.
Fire department funding.
Yeah, that's a state. Don't like this.
Are you asking about the public fire protection?
no, actual manning of fire departments. The cost of it. Most, in a lot of other states, they're county-wide fire departments. Wisconsin elected to have 5 village by town fire departments. It's in statute.
Yeah, you have to have some level of fire.
It's the funding of it, like, creates part of the town, it's just a town.
I know we've looked at this forever, but under opportunity, we could talk about consolidation of services. which has been examined.
We've done that.
I know, we have like 1,000 pages, but it doesn't cease to be.
We have a very long time.
Sure, I was hoping to wrap it up by 7 o'clock, so that was my goal, that's why my going,
Which is, yeah.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Bill, read.
Okay, we have one more item on the committee, a little discussion on the policy for non-disclosure agreements. We put that on there.
I did.
Did you have something like that?
Was there anything in the package?
Non-disclosure agreements?
So, at the October 28th meeting, trustee Martin had asked staff to draft a policy for the non-disclosure agreement use within the village. And in past discussions related to NDA use in the village determined that there was no knowledge from staff or legal that an NDA had ever been entered into by staff or any village officials. Further conversations with the village attorney explained that any NDA proposed to be entered into by staff or officials required village board approval, and any such agreement would be outside of the scope of individual authority of such positions. And so anything that we would do would require us to go to the village board, certainly defeating the purpose of an NDA. And as part of that, I also included Wisconsin statute 19.35, which relates to the Wisconsin Public Records Law. Kind of goes over a number of those things where there are certain elements of things that are proprietary information that do not be disclosed if somebody is looking at some of those are protected under the Wisconsin Public Records Law.
Okay, could you give a brief explanation of what those things are? Or is it an exhaustive list?
Todd included some information in your packet, but when you think of proprietary information, for example, if a company was looking to locate in the village and as a part of explaining what that company did, they shared some information about a formula for one of their products. That would be a proprietary information that would be confidential. But in my conversations with Todd in response to the questions about whether or not the village has a policy on entering into non-disclosure agreements, I wasn't aware of any that have ever been entered into by the village proper or the village staff or officials. And the authority that an individual employee or an official would have wouldn't encompass the scope of being able to bind the village in that way and within the scope of their employment. So I don't think that would be a proper agreement for somebody to enter into as an employee or an official of the village. So at this point, I mean, we wouldn't, from a legal perspective, be recommending that you actually establish a policy on that for that reason. If you felt you wanted to make a policy statement, you could certainly do so by either passing a resolution or adopting an ordinance that says no one shall enter into an NDA. I would caution on that just because sometimes in the employment context, there can be non-disclosure agreements as part of settlement agreements, and I'm not your employment counsel, but I just don't want to cross a line there that creates a problem in your employment context either that could create a risk for the village. So that's another concern that I have. And then finally, I did remember when I was looking at my notes that there was a second question about whether you could regulate or have a policy that says, your service providers, your professional service providers, to restrict what they do. I think that would be beyond the scope of what you would have the authority to regulate. And I don't think that the village, be my recommendation that you don't get in the business of telling your service providers how to run their businesses. And that could come up on a case-by-case situation.
Okay, that's fine. I actually thought this was caused by, I had the impression that Todd and Pete had probably signed non-disclosure agreements in the context of discussions of various things that have come up lately. that obviously is not the case. But, so I guess it has more to do with information sharing. So if there's not a non-disclosure agreement, for example, Dewberry was meeting with, staff, but I at least knew very little about what that content was. And that's why I had the assumption, that's why I brought it up. I assumed that there were non-disclosure agreements that limited the availability of that discussion. So that's what caused it, and we can talk about that at another time, because I don't think that's part of this specific agenda item. But that was my concern, and that's why I brought it up. So I would say no action.
Okay, and we are adjourned from the committee of the whole, and we'll move